17-year-old Shell and her father, Pete, own a tiny petrol station in the remote, isolated highlands of Scotland. Their life is so far away from the real world that they hardly have any company except each other and a couple of regular customers. While both these customers seem deeply interested in Shell, she has a secret of her own. A forbidden game was deep in her heart. One evening, Hugh, one of the station's regular customers, comes by as expected and Shell gets to work. She asks after Hugh's family while he pays, and they both bid goodbye to each other. Shell then goes over to the scrapyard adjacent to the petrol station where her father was working on a car. She informs him that she was done for the day. At home, which was attached to the petrol station, Shell begins cooking dinner. When Pete wraps up his work and gets home, he suddenly has an epileptic seizure. Shell stays with him and helps him through. When father and daughter have dinner sometime later, the sound of an approaching car gets Shell back to the petrol station. This time, it was another regular customer, Adam. As she always does, she asks him about how his work at the local sawmill was going. He replies that they had somewhat of a bad accident that day, and after paying for the petrol, he leaves. After her bath a while later, Shell opens the door of the petrol station to a passerby, Robert, asking for help with an accident. Shell and Pete accompany him back to his car. Robert's wife, Claire, joins them and they tow their car with them. On the way, they exchange stories. Shell learns that Robert and Claire were married and had come over to see the Highlands. When Claire asks if Shell was married too, Pete clarifies that she was his daughter. He then offers to drive the couple to a bed and breakfast for the night. Yet another slow and monotonous day begins for Shell the next morning when Pete leaves for his trip to the scrap merchant. Her peace is interrupted when Robert and Claire bring along their new rental and check out the damages to their car. When Shell tells them that it might be long before Pete got back, they decide to stick around for a while, and Claire gets talking to Shell in the kitchen. She learns that Shell was 17 years old and that her mother had left when Shell was just 4 years old. When Claire comments on how isolated from the rest of the world their petrol station was, Shell replies that they sometimes don't see a single car for an entire week, but she doesn't mind it since she was used to it. Shell also tells her that she used to go to school when she was younger, but her father has been homeschooling her for quite a while now. She then gives Claire the book she found in their car, but while leaving, Claire hands it back to her as a note of their gratitude for all the help. Pete gets home that night when Shell had already begun preparing their dinner. When he gets in, she smells alcohol on him and asks where he had gone. He tells her that he went to the pub on his way back home. When she asks if he had been anywhere else, he assures her that he just went to the pub and had not been roaming around anywhere else. A while later, she interrupts her father while he washes up to ask if he loves her. Eager to know his response, she refuses to leave until he confirms that he did indeed love her. Shell wakes up freezing later that night and realizes that their heating system had stopped working. She gathers her blanket and goes to Pete's room and lets him know that the boiler had switched off. He tries to get it working again, but is unable to. He goes back to his room and informs Shell that he would need to fix an inlet pipe of the boiler to repair it the next day. Shell sits by the heater in the petrol station the next morning to warm herself, till the time Pete could fix the boiler at home and get it running. Happy to see Hugh again, she does her customary catch-up with him about his family while filling up the tank of his car. Once she was done, Hugh then hands over a pair of jeans that he bought for her as a gift. This makes her particularly happy, and she asks him to wait for a bit while she quickly changes into them. When she comes back overjoyed that they fit her perfectly, it makes Hugh feel relieved. Shell hugs him in gratitude, and then, intending to settle his petrol bill, she turns to get his change from the cash box. This time, he hugs her. Refusing to budge, he holds her in place and asks her to stay, but she manages to get away from him. A little ashamed, he simply takes his change and leaves without looking back at her. By the time she changed into her jeans again, Pete was back home with the pipe he needed to fix the boiler. Shell tells him that since they could use the heater, he didn't have to rush with the boiler. Just as she says that it gives them a reason to cuddle up to stay warm, Pete stops her and tells her not to think of these things. When he says that he should get her a dog instead, she angrily leaves. Pete spends some time carefully taking apart Robert and Claire's destroyed car while Shell reads a book at the petrol station. She is pleased when Adam comes along a while later. When he invites her for a drive with him, she declines by saying that she couldn't just leave the petrol station whenever she felt like it. She then invites him inside instead. Seeing Pete working on the boiler, she introduces him to Adam and then proceeds to make some coffee for all of them. When Adam volunteers to get the heater from the shop, Pete taunts Shell by asking if they provide coffee now to customers of the petrol station. Once Adam was back with the heater, everyone settles in for a warm cup of coffee. The conversation begins awkwardly with Shell telling Adam about the car accident over the weekend and how the weather will continue to cause a few more in the next couple of months due to reduced visibility. In an attempt to get the conversation going, Adam tells Pete and Shell about a theft at the sawmill he worked at. He says that they lost 5 new chainsaws and that he was fired over suspicions of being responsible for it. While nobody at the sawmill accused him directly, he says they just gave him a call the day after the theft and asked him not to come in for his next shift. Remaining optimistic, he says that he could either get his job back at the pub his mother owned, or he was even open to thinking about putting up a petrol station, much like Pete's. He even goes on to ask if they needed anything he could help with. Pete turns him down, saying he didn't have any work for Adam. Outside by the petrol station later, Adam gets close to Shell and asks her to accompany him for a drive again. Looking forward to having her on his own, he persuades her by telling her that Pete could easily manage the petrol station for a while in her absence. Successful at convincing her, he takes her away and then plays unboxing games with her in his car. A while later, he drops her back at the petrol station and drives away while Shell looks somewhat devastated and disappointed with her choices. Her gloomy mood follows her into the house and through the time she spends cooking dinner for her and Pete. In fact, she isn't even able to eat all that much. Later, she goes to her room to find Pete making her bed so she can stay warm and comfortable through the night. Picking up on her unresponsive attitude, he asks whether she wanted him to do something to help. When she shakes her head to imply that he couldn't help, he wishes her a good night and leaves her room. Overcome with emotions, seeing the coffee Pete made for them the next morning, Shell goes over to him and hugs him. At the petrol station later, a woman asks if her young daughter could use the toilet. Showing them the way, Shell directs them inside. When she attempts to talk to the lady, she answers vaguely and avoids giving away any information. Instead, she comments on how long it was taking her daughter to be done. Going in to check, Shell finds the little girl staring at Pete. Bringing her back to her mother outside, she then sees them off soon after. Turning around to go inside, she notices that the girl had forgotten her doll on the counter. Quickly grabbing it, Shell runs to give it back. She gives the car quite a chase before the woman finally slows down and drives back. She thanks Shell for reuniting her daughter with the doll and then drives away again. Turning back, Shell realizes the distance she covered judging by how small the petrol station and their home looked from where she was. Meanwhile, not finding Shell anywhere at home or the petrol station, Pete looks down the empty road wondering where she suddenly disappeared. As it turns out, Shell had decided to take a break lying down in the roadside heather and taking in the abundant fresh air around her, making it impossible for Pete to spot her from his vantage point. Shell eventually makes it home, only to find Pete in the middle of another fit. While trying to help him, she gets severely bitten by him, but she endures it for his sake. He slowly gains control of himself, and Shell accompanies him to his room where he falls asleep. Upon waking up a while later, he tells Shell that when he couldn't find her anywhere, he thought that she had left him and the life they had together. When he tells her that she had to stay for him and for Shell, she realizes that he wasn't really talking to her but to her mother. She kisses him and promises him that she will stay. This makes him kiss her again, but she stops him when things become rough. He realizes what he did and apologizes to Shell. Despite her assuring him that it was fine, he still feels bad. A while later, the two of them fall asleep together. Late that night, when he wakes up next to her, he sees the deep marks his bite left on her, and even the bruises she had on her legs after she had been with Adam. He goes out to the petrol station, sees an oncoming truck, and unhesitatingly walks straight in its way. Shell is woken up by the sound of the truck suddenly hitting the brakes and is devastated when she realizes that she had lost her father. Adam comes over to comfort her early in the morning and stays with her. When she wakes up later, she sees Adam sleeping peacefully beside her. He wakes up in a while and finds her making coffee for them. The sound of a truck alerts her to the arrival of a customer, and she leaves Adam with his coffee to go to the petrol station. While she refuels the truck, the driver comments on how lonely the place must always be. That gets her thinking about nothing holding her back anymore, and she decides to join the driver. Without any thoughts of her final destination, Shell leaves her old life behind in search of a new one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more exciting videos. Cheers!